Welcome to LiveDaf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Maseches MEILAH Daf Chaf. We begin at the Mishnah, which is on the second to the last line of your Testament base. So we have a gizbar, a manager, who manages the Hegdish properties. And he takes some material for himself. Does that constitute MEILAH? Says the Mishnah, not al even a karashal Hegdish. He took a stone or a beam of Hegdish for personal use. Hareza loimal. It does not qualify as MEILAH. Why? Because he's meant to manage. He's meant to look after the materials belonging to Hegdish. So he didn't really change its rishus. He didn't really take it out of Hegdish domain because he and the Hegdish are one and the same domain. His Hegdish is synonymous with Hegdish. His domain is synonymous with Hegdish because when he has something, it's really being looked after for Hegdish, so to speak. So even though in his mind he's thinking to take it for himself, but he hasn't really changed its rishus yet. He hasn't really taken it out of Hegdish possession, so to speak. But if he offers it to somebody else, so once it leaves his rishus, once it leaves his possession, that activates MEILAH. The gizbar takes this material and gives it to somebody else. So the gizbar has committed MEILAH because he orchestrated the diversion. The recipient has not committed MEILAH. Because that's the rule when it comes to MEILAH. A person who orchestrates it, arranges it, he's the one that does the MEILAH. And now once the other fellow has it, he can use it. Because as we learned yesterday, once MEILAH is executed, it loses its kedusha. It's considered mundane, chulin materials. Now let's say the gizbar, instead of just taking it, he would have actually used it. He built it into his house. So he took the beam off the Hegdish and he put it into his house. Again, there's no MEILAH yet. Unless he sits beneath it, under the rain, under the sun, he has hana, valued at a pruta. Now, the obvious question is, by merely building into the house, he's already changing its designation, he made it part of his house. That in itself should be hana. We'll see in the Gemara. Not a pruta shel Hegdish. Once again, back to the gizbar, who's in charge of the Hegdish funds. So he pulls out $1, puts it in his pocket. That's not MEILAH because, like we said, him and Hegdish are the same possession, are the same domain. Not a pruta shel Hegdish. He took a pruta out of Hegdish. That's not MEILAH. But he gave it to somebody else. He committed MEILAH, but his recipient has not. Let's say the gizbar takes the money and inadvertently gives it to the bathhouse attendant as a fee for future use. Even though he hadn't yet bathed in the bathhouse, he hadn't really utilized and actualized that entrance fee. He committed MEILAH. You know why? Because he got the right to use it. So he already got something in exchange. Because the bathhouse attendant, in effect, tells him, here, come on in, you're invited. Look, the bathhouse is open wide for you. Come inside and use it. Since he granted him that right, that privilege, he already received his hana from the Hegdish money, and that's an act of MEILAH. One more point. What about combining? So if a fellow took Hegdish food worth a pruta, part of it he ate, part of it he served his friend. He took something from Hegdish, he enjoyed it, a half a pruta worth, and he offered his friend as well. He had a achila, he offered his friend some hana, or vice versa. They have half a pruta of his hana in conjunction with the half a pruta of his friends eating. Mitzdarfin, ze'em zeh, afilus man rubit, they're combined, they're joined together, even if it happened over a long period of time, like we learned the other day. The orchestrator is fully responsible. Okay, let's go back to the Mishnah. He took the beam, he took the building material. The Mishnah says, if he took it for his own use, there's no me'ilah yet. Unless he gave it to somebody else. What's the difference? Either way. He just diverted Hegdish material. Mashmuel. Begizbar, we're talking about the manager. Building manager. The fellow who was given the construction material to look after. So while it's still in his domain, even though he's diverting it for personal use, that's not considered a change of designation. Because as we said, that's his job to manage, to look after the Hegdish materials, wherever he is. If it's under his care, technically it's still in the Hegdish possession. So it's not MEILAH, as opposed to giving it to somebody else. That's a true diversion. That's considered MEILAH. But if the Gizbar took the material and actually put it into his house, he installed it in his bias, that can trigger MEILAH, provided that he enjoyed it. He sat underneath it, he was protected from the elements. Now why do you need that element of actual hano? The mere installation, adding it to your house, wouldn't you think that is considered a drastic change of designation? It became part of your house. And, certainly it's considered as having lost Hegdish status there. It's no longer in the Hegdish possession. It's in your house, built into your property. Why do you have to have that requirement to reside underneath it? Given the shani, once he changed it, it was now turned into this person's house. Why is that not MEILAH? Amarav. He didn't really install it permanently. He just placed it loosely over the hole in the roof, right? Amarav Aruba, there was this opening in the roof, this window, the skylight, and he placed the beam over it. So the actual placement is not a change, not a drastic change. It still can be just pulled off. And therefore, there's no MEILAH unless they actually sat beneath it and used it to protect himself from the elements. And that is considered a hano, which qualifies as MEILAH. Okay, but once he built it, and you're telling me it would be considered MEILAH, theoretically, if he would have installed it permanently, miyasmal, that would be considered a MEILAH. Now, we had a rule the other day that MEILAH only applies to something detached from the ground, but something which is mechuber lakarka has no MEILAH. So why would there be MEILAH on the stone which was now attached to the ground? It's mechuber lakarka. Lema mir Rav. Perhaps it can be a support to Rav, who likewise holds that some material that had been detached and now built into the ground is categorized as something detached, has a status of tolush, because originally it was detached. Rav tells us regarding a different matter, regarding Avodah Zarah. We have a similar rule. A person worships mechuber lakarka, it doesn't get affected, it doesn't become asur. But if he worships something detached, an idol, it becomes asur. What if it's something in between? It was detached, building material, which is now attached to the ground. A person bows to a building, since it's comprised of building materials which had been detached until construction. We consider it tolush. It's qualified as tolush. And likewise over here, that's the reason why there's MEILAH on this stone, which is now attached, because it had been detached until now. Amarav achbed Rav, no, you can't compare one to the other. Perhaps regarding Avodah Zarah, it wouldn't get affected by this person's bowing, it's attached to the ground, mechuber lakarka. MEILAH works differently. Hano. Haniris la'inayim asra Torah. Torah forbade hano, which is discernible, which is visible, which means to say like this. Since, as he's building the stone, as he's pushing the stone into the brick line, before it's actually attached, at that point he's having a no, he's making it part of his building while still detached. That activates MEILAH. even though ultimately it's going to become attached, and mechubar l'karka is free of MEILAH. But since as he begins using it, as he begins installing it, at that point, at that stage, it's still detached. So it's seen, it's appreciated, so to speak. It's noticeable as it's going into the building. That's enough to be considered tolush for triggering of MEILAH. So the MEILAH relates to that point where it's still detached and in the process of being installed. But let's say, for example, Hegdesh owns a building. They've purchased a building and there's no MEILAH on something which is mechubar l'karka. We're talking that it was something off the ground and he used it, installed it at his house. So as he's putting it in, it's not yet attached. And that's what triggers the MEILAH. Lema misayale. Perhaps we can support Rab's concept that detached, which became detached, is still quantified as detached. From a different price. Lema misayale. Hadar b'veis shel hegdish. Kimishin minimum. Person lives, he resides in a home belonging to hegdish. As soon as he has anov shalaputi, this does MEILAH. That can only be explained if we learn that these stones are considered like detached materials, since they were so before installment. Amr Shlakish, no, Hasam v'sheikdisha v'sei banai. Talking about a unique case where it's not like Hegdish purchased a building. He was magdish the materials, the stones, before he built it in. He constructed it. So since he was magdish it while still detached, in which case MEILAH would apply at that point, it does not lose that MEILAH potential, even after being installed in the building. But let's say it was built up and then, so first he built the building, then he was magdish it. What are you saying? There wouldn't be MEILAH? Because it never had that potential, never had that moment of tolush min karka, because Hegdish acquired it only post-construction as a in-ground facility. If that's the case, my area rohit v'tani. So why did the Bryce have to go run over to a different case to highlight a MEILAH-free situation? A person lived in a unit which was sort of like a cave, which was attached to the ground from way back, right? It wasn't built that way. It was a natural, unit. There's no MEILAH. Why? Because it's mechubar l'karka. So that's an example of MEILAH-free facilities. Why doesn't just the Brisa speak about a regular construction, which was turned into Hegdish post-construction, which is also MEILAH-free? Leima hadar b'bayis should just say a case of hadar b'bayis shel avonim shabanim sevekdish leima. Brisa, the same money could have said a bigger chiddush. That person lives in a bayis shel avonim, a stone structure which had been built before being designated as Hegdish. So since there was no MEILAH option while in detached form, there's no MEILAH. If in fact that is so, right, you're making this distinction. MEILAH only applies to tolush min karka, something which is not mechubar. Well, it depends. If it was in a state of Hegdish while in construction state, while in a material state, then the MEILAH status carries on even post-construction. But if it was turned to Hegdish only post-construction, never had a window of opportunity, it never had a taller state where it belonged to Hegdish. There's no MEILAH. So why doesn't the Brisa highlight that case? Amris, the answer was like this. That's not so clear-cut. It's given to confusion. Depends what kind of building, depends when it was built, right? The Brisa would prefer speaking about a straightforward case. A cave in the ground is always mechubar, there's no MEILAH, there's no question there. A case of a stone structure, well, it depends. It only depends. If it was designated as Hegdish while still in its construction, in its material form, then the MEILAH status carries on into the built structure. But if it was turned Hegdish post-construction, there's no MEILAH. So instead of getting into nitty-gritties, the Brisa just cited a clear-cut example. So that's clear and understood. Okay, so let's just recap. We had the Chiddush in the Mishnah about a Gizber who's authorized to look after the Hegdish materials, in which case if he moves things around, it's not MEILAH unless he actually diverts it, if he gives it to somebody else. or puts it into his house. Now, if he builds into the house, that in itself would be considered a MEILAH, but if it's not built in permanently, it's just placed on top, so he has to have actual use of a hanosh or put to be considered MEILAH. Now, what if it's actually built in? So we know that mechuber l'karka typically is not susceptible to MEILAH. But here it's different, because since while he's putting it in, it's visibly hegdish material being used, that will trigger the MEILAH. Likewise, the person was maglish materials and then he built it as a hegdish facility, even though it's a complete built facility, since there was MEILAH option pre-construction, MEILAH status still continues on. Rav is a chiddush that by Avodah Zarah as well, even though mechuber l'karka is not susceptible to Isra Avodah Zarah, it doesn't become also when you bow to it, but if it had been detached and then built in, we just reckon with the fact that it was construction material, and we classified it as talish. There was a question whether we can compare it to our Mishnah, and the Gemara said no, MEILAH works with a different system, as we explained. Okay, we turn to the next parak. Says the Mishnah, Shaliach she'asa shlichusai. If the messenger did his job, Bala Bayis Mal, the sender, the homeowner, so to speak, the one who had the authority over the hegdish material. So let's say Reuven was the Bala Bayis. He had hegdish material in his jurisdiction, and he asked Shimon to go spend it for him. If Shimon, the Shaliach, the messenger, did his job, executed his instructions faithfully, then guess what? You know who's responsible? The Baal Bayis, Reuven. Unlike throughout the entire Torah, where we say just the opposite. When a person sends somebody to do an avera on his behalf, who's responsible? The perpetrator. It's your fault. You can't blame it on the sender. In fact, there's an expression in the Gemara that explains this. Divrei harav v'divrei hatalmud. If one has a choice between following the words of the master, in this case Hashem, the master of the universe, versus the words of the Talmud, of the student, of the person, the human being who sent him, who did he listen to? Of course Hashem. So it's your prerogative, it's your choice. You're accountable. Well, here it's different. This is based on the connection to Truma, which we had the other day, where we have the concept of a shlichus. Right? The farmer asks somebody to do Truma on his behalf. When he does that Truma properly, it counts on behalf of the farmer. Likewise, by shlichus, it's about orchestrating. It's about arranging the MEILAH. So if one asks somebody to do the MEILAH, the asker, the sender, the Baal Bayis, he is Mal. But that's only if he did his job properly. If he followed instructions. But if he did his own thing, well, he also shlichus, he didn't do his job properly. He did something else instead. HaShliach Mal. In this case, the shliach is fully responsible. Look, you didn't follow the words of the Baal Bayis. He's not responsible. Ketzah, for example, Amar Loi, so Reuven the Baal Bayis, who's hosting some guests, and he happens to have some hegdish meat in his possession. Amar Loi, so he tells the waiter, tells Shimon, Tein basar la'orchin. Could you please serve meat to our guests? And what does Shimon do? Instead of serving him regular meat, he served him liver, which technically is fleischiks, but it's not really labeled meat. You refer to liver as liver. So he gave them liver, which also happened to be hegdish. V'nosam lehem kaved. He gave them kaved. Or just the opposite. Kaved. Please serve them liver. V'nosam lehem basar. You serve them meat. In this case, since he deviated, hashaliach mal. Who's responsible? The shaliach. Another example of deviation. Amar lo tein lehem chaticha chaticha. Reuven asks the waiter, serve them one piece of meat per person. And Shimon got generous, and he says, "V'oimer lehem." He tells them, "V'oimer tlu shtayim shtayim." He says, "Here, take two apiece." So the first was a fulfillment of the shlichus, but the second one was an addition, his own addition. And what did they do? They got super generous. V'heim notlu shalosh. Shalosh. They took three apiece. In this case, kulam malu. All three committed MEILAH. Reuven, Shimon, and the guest. Why? Because the first piece was served on account of Reuven's instruction. So that wish was fulfilled. The second piece was the waiter's orchestration. The third piece was the guests. doing. So all three committed MEILAH. We turn to the base. It would seem in the Mishnah that basar and kavod, although they're close in nature, they're technically in the both in the meat family, but then since there's some disparity in terms of labeling, and typically if you would ask somebody to buy you meat or to serve meat, he should come back and check with you if he only found liver. They're close enough, but not the same thing, right? So something which would require a double check, a confirmation, a consultation, to ensure that in fact he wants this too. So on the one hand, it does identify as meat, it does get labeled as meat, it's close enough to actual meat, but it's not exactly. The Mishnah considers that to be a separate item. And that explains why if you serve them liver instead of meat, the Baal Bayis is not responsible. Mantana, so who's the holder of this position, of this opinion, the Chol Milsa, that in any matter, in any item, the Mimlach Allah Shliach, Mimlach means to go and check and confirm, consult, on which the Shliach would have to go back and double check. Did you have this in mind too? Meaning it's not so far apart that he wouldn't even bother checking. Basically you have three types, something which is exactly the same, something which is so extremely different that he wouldn't even entertain it as a possibility. He wouldn't even come back to check. You have something in the middle. Liver and meat, something in the middle. It's close enough, but it's not the same. He has to come back and check before he proceeds, right? Tarti milihavin, that makes it a separate thing. It makes them two. And that's why if it's meat instead of liver, the shliach is responsible, not the homeowner. Who's the opinion holder? Rabbi Chisda like Rabbi Akiva, not like Rabbi Akiva. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's close enough. It's loosely related. It's in the same family. It's considered one and the same regarding these matters. This is not, we have a Mishnah back in Adorim. So there it's also a question of definitions. I make a vow to refrain from X and Y is close enough, but it's not exactly X. Does it cover Y as well? It's not. I made a nether to keep off vegetables. Now, typically vegetables refer to carrots, potatoes. What about gourds, melons, pumpkins? Mutar b'diluin, you can have diluin. So although it's in the general vegetable family, it's not typically what people refer to when they say vegetables. Rabbi Akiva Eiser, he says it's covered under the same nether. The fact is it's close enough. The fact is, if you would send somebody to buy you vegetables and he only finds dilum, he'll come back and check with you. Apparently, there's some relation, there's some connection. It's in the same family. And likewise, wouldn't he consider meat and liver close enough as well? So why does our Mishnah say it's considered a deviation? Abaye Amar Afilu Tim Rabbi Akiva. You know what? Our Mishnah can follow Rabbi Akiva as well. That's all good and well by neder. I said vegetables. Well, it loosely covers, all types of. But when I send somebody to buy, or I send somebody to serve, and it's not the same exact, even though it's a distant cousin, but he would have to come back. Right? Etiquette would require him coming back and checking with me. Wouldn't he have to come check with me? And in the case of the liver and the meat, the Mishnah, he didn't come check. So I'm not responsible. When the Chachamim presented this solution to Rava, in the name of Abaye, Amar Lu, he says, great resolution. Amar Lu, Shaper Kamer Nachmeni is Abaye. Some say he was called Nachmeni by Rabba who raised him. When Abaye was an orphan, and he named him Nachmeni after Abaye's father, or some say it was actually Nachmeni was actually Rabba's father's name. And he didn't want to, Abaye was Rabba's father's name. He didn't want to call the adoptee outright with his own father's name, so he called him Nachmeni. Some say that Abaye is an acronym, Rashi Tevis, for the words in the pasuk Asher B'cha Yerucham Yasen, to evoke compassion on Abaye, who was a Yasim. In any case, Rebbe was impressed. He says, wow. Abaye said, well, that's the proper resolution to this question. Okay, speaking of which, so we have machlekes regarding the Durim. He says, no vegetables. Tanakama says, Diluin is not technically a vegetable. Rabbi Akiva says it's close enough and it's covered. Man Tana the Palgalid Rabbi Akiva. So we know Rabbi Akiva by name. Who's the authority that disagrees with Rabbi Akiva? And when there's some slight disparity, it's not covered. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, it's him. The Sani we find a similar discussion regarding meat. Hanoidim Abasar, I'm off meat. Does that refer to only prime meat? What about secondary cuts of meat? Also b'chol minei basar. It covers everything. This is like Rabbi Akiva, right? It covers all types. Basar baroish, baraglayim, the meat of the head, of the feet, bekana, of the connected to the windpipe, like the lungs, that area, v'kavet, and liver as well, ubalev, heart, vasar, b'basar eifos, even fowl, like chicken is also included, but not fish or grasshoppers. That's a class of its own. It doesn't need shchit. It's its own different world. Umoter b'basar dagim chagavim, fish or grasshopper are out of the equation. So this is pretty much in line with Rabbi Akiva, that the term meat covers all variations. However, Shimon Gamliel Matir, he says you're allowed to have anything which is not considered prime meat, baroish, baraglayim, bakana, bakavad, b'ayfis, b'dagim chagavim. V'chein haya, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Likewise, you would tell us, don't ever pay standard, meat price for kravayim, for innards, for secondary, lesser quality pieces of meat. V'chein Rabbi Shimon Gamliel kravayim, the innards of the animal, la basar hein. It's not really labeled meat. It's not really qualified. It doesn't qualify as real meat. But whoever eats them, la barnish inishu, is not a person. I mean to say, Rashi explains, meaning, don't value it as regular meat. Don't pay regular meat price for it. It's a tier below it. Okay, so according to him, when a person is noider from meat, it doesn't cover these secondaries. Unlike Rabbi Akiva, who says it's all in the family and that's enough. Now, Tanakama, according to the first opinion, that covers pretty much everything. Basar covers everything, but he leaves out fish, leaves out grasshoppers, but he does cover chicken. What's the difference? Tanakama, Maishna, Basar Eifais. Why is he covering chicken? Because a shopper who was sent to buy Bisr L'Chiyusa, animal meat, regular meat, would tend to come back and say, look, I didn't find it, Vasoy, and I brought you instead Bisr D'Sifra, I brought you a chicken. So, it's close enough, and if that's the case. The same with fish. Look, if he has nothing else, he'll come back with fish. A person's accustomed to saying, I couldn't find regular animal meat, Vasoy, dog, I brought you fish. You're right, in general you're right, but here we're talking about a fellow who in any case has an aversion to fish. It's unhealthy for him today, so that wasn't really part of the equation. Probably because skin is the day that they drew blood from him. He has to keep off fish. The person wouldn't eat fish, it's dangerous. So the same with chicken. He wouldn't eat chicken either on that day. Shmuel teaches us, Shmuel was an expert doctor. He would say, a person who drew blood and has bird meat, his heart will fly away like a bird. He'll faint. It's not healthy. We find the same in a brayso. After the hakaza, they used to have a big suda to replenish the blood supply, but keep off fish, birds, or heavily salted meat. You're right. We're not talking about that day. We're talking about a different day where he keeps off fish specifically. A day where his eyes are hurting. Asking, and we're speaking about that day. He wouldn't eat fish anyway, so it's not part of the equation. But otherwise, any other type of meat is included. Okay, so bottom line, we have a discussion regarding terminology. By Nedarim, you have machlekes. Does it cover only specifically that type? Like Yarak is only Yarak, not Luim. Basar is only prime meat and not the others. Or Kontra Rakiva covers everything which is loosely identified with this term. And regarding MEILAH, the Gemara concluded, all agree, even something which is loosely related will not cut it because he should come back and check. And if he proceeds without double checking, it's his doing. So in the case of the 3 pieces, I asked him to serve 1, he offered 2, and we all are responsible. Why? It's a new offering. I said 1, he gave 2. It's a whole different thing. Shmamina, perhaps we can conclude from here, the person adds an amount to the authorized amount. It's still considered a fulfillment of his job regarding the first amount. So you don't treat it like a totally new entity. There's the original plus the addition. And this pertains to halachos of buying and selling. Let's say I ask somebody to sell 50 pounds of apples and goes and sells 75. Or Rashi brings the case of the more appropriate, the case of the of property, right? I asked him to sell an acre, he sold 2 acres. So is it considered an addition? Am I still committed to that first acre? Or do I say, no, it's a brand new transaction which I don't authorize? The whole thing is null and void. The Mishnah sounds like it's an addition. It's not a new thing. It's the old plus a bit new. Is that true? Amar Rav Sheshes, no. Not necessarily. The Amar Shliach toil achas midaita, achas midaita. Shliach specified, look, it's not a new offering. Here's the tray of meat. 1 from the gracious host, and the second one from the gracious waiter. So he's clearly adding. He's not repackaging it into a new double, 2-piece offer. So here certainly it's considered the original offering plus, and the original offering is still intact, and that's on the host's account. And the chiddush is, perhaps we can argue, maybe even in this case, the waiter, hijacked the hosting. He overtook it and he replaced the Baal Bayis' offering. In which case, Baal Bayis should not be responsible at all. Kamashman, the answer is yes. Yeah, the fact is, the first meat was still on account of the host, and for that he's responsible. Okay, so we have an interesting chiddush. Typically we say, Ein shliach l'dvar avera, except for some exceptions, one of which is MEILAH, and it's conditioned upon doing shlichusa. You got to do the job, otherwise, if he does his own thing, such as liver instead of meat, it's the shliach's fault. But if he adds, and he specified, look, I'm just adding, in that case, everybody is equally responsible. All the best to you, and hatzlacha rabba.